How many discounts does USAA Auto Insurance offer? Too many to say here. Multi-vehicle discount, safe driver discount, new vehicle discount, storage discount, legacy.
How many discounts will you stack up? Visit USAA.com/auto discounts. Restrictions apply.
As a scientist, I can tell you that Sundays are only 24 hours long. But with NFL Sunday Ticket and YouTube TV, you get every game every Sunday all in one place. That's upwards of 30 hours of NFL in one day. How can there be 30 hours in 24 hours, you ask? I have a theory. Magic. New users get NFL Sunday Ticket for 8 payments of $34.50 per month. Sign up at NFLSundayTicket.com. Local and national games on YouTube TV. NFL Sunday Ticket for out-of-market games excludes digital-only games and commercial use. Terms and embargoes apply. Availability varies.
Brooks Running reminds us that we're all powered by something. Whether it's the me-time energy of a run after a day at the office, the electrifying energy of your first marathon, or the infectious energy of a group run with your friends. No matter what energy powers you, Brooks has gear specifically designed to unleash it. So lace up and let it out. Let's run there. Visit brooksrunning.com today to learn more.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Greetings, everybody. I hope you're well. Happy Saturday. We're about to go into the international break. I'm off on holiday tomorrow, and Sam's already out sunning himself on his. So we thought we'd take this time to take the opportunity to catch up with one of the biggest figures in WGTA's history. That's former founding co-host Nick, as the Eldu brothers run the pod once more, just like old times. Bar, bar. All I need after really indifferent starts to the season. How you doing, Nick? You all right?
Hey Tom, yep, I'm back. I'm good, thanks. Apologies if I'm having a few sound or technical issues. Unfortunately, I've got a few signal and headphone issues, so hopefully the quality is as good as you're used to, I suppose, with Tom and Sam and their expensive microphones and decent internet connections. So we are Who Got the Assist, of course. It's been about a year since my last appearance, so it's going to be a little bit of a nostalgia-induced session for some of the hardcore listeners who have been with us since the start in the early years of the WGTA pod, and then it'll be back to normal service next week with Tom and Sam doing a sort of pre-game week pod. So on today's pod, it's going to just be a bit of an open discussion, really, a fireside chat. We're just going to be talking about how we think FPL has changed over the 9+ years WGTA has been running, maybe a little bit about how we've changed as managers, a little bit about sort of recurring themes, how FPL is nowadays, and maybe some forecasting for how it might grow more as well in the future. And as we're back together, we thought we didn't want to let down our longer term listeners who remember that sometimes we have a theme. So just watch out for that as well.
Yes, indeed. Looking forward to the themes returning. It's Sunday, the 31st of August. It's the end of the school holidays. Lots of happy parents out there, I'm sure, listening to this one. And yeah, international break is upon us as the Villa's Palace games just wrapped up. A terrible game week 4 for me, but as you'll hear next week, an amazing game week 4 for Sam. I'm going to leave my game week 4 for this week. But Nick, game week 3 for this week. But Nick, you've had a very good week and you've had a very aggressive start to the season, haven't you? I mean, just how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty well. So if you remember last year, it was actually my best ever season. I finished just outside the top 5K. It was around this time that I was actually on the pod, early doors to boast about a top 1K rank that was giving me the bends at the time after a successful wild card. And things kind of petered out a little bit after that. And that 1K rank sort of disappeared completely and never featured again. But I did manage to just finish just outside the top 5K. So pretty happy with that. I mean, this season, Game week 1 was a bit of a car crash, like most people, to be honest. I finished about sort of 7 million, 8 million or something horrible like that. But then I took a gamble and did the free hit in game week 2, and the likes of Sioprez got that brace, and that restored a little bit of dignity for my team. And then this week, Bruno came in for Palmer, and obviously that last minute salvo with the penalty was huge, but also a couple of other surprises in the team with a sort of Jared Bowen goal today, return from Ndai, and Sheik Virgil at the back, which helped give me a green arrow.
Yeah, okay. Doing very well by the sounds of it. And I suppose being more aggressive is definitely something that I wish I'd done this week. Although, kind of, yeah, I didn't take a hit for removing Palmer in the end, which was probably my problem. But anyway, we'll talk about that a bit more next week. This week, as mentioned earlier on, just a bit of a fireside chat really with Nick, as mentioned by Nick a little while ago. A few little bits and pieces to catch up on here, a bit of an open discussion really, nothing really more than that. And the first thing really is about kind of how FPL has evolved. I suppose when we started WGTA 9+ years ago, Nick, what was really interesting back then compared to now, for those who don't know, was that stats was a really niche thing. I think, it was kind of slightly kind of spoken about here or there, but it wasn't really sort of, a mainstream thing. Nowadays, like your FPL manager wouldn't be seen dead without a load of stats, apart from your serious sort of grass FC holdouts. We'll talk about algorithms and stuff later on. But I mean, what do you see as being sort of the big sort of evolutions in terms of how FPL has changed over the last 9 years?
Yeah, I would definitely say like more focus on data and analytics. And certainly when we started the podcast, that wasn't really around. I think we were one of the first podcasts to really to look at stats, and a lot of the other podcasts didn't really talk about, some of the data points that we would raise. And I think, there was actually a lot of focus at the time in terms of what might be colloquially or disparagingly called analog data or fake plastic data. So, we talk mainly about shots and shots on target and chances created, and now it's a bit more nuanced to that. But I think we've got some fond memories from those times. For instance, the focus we like to do on the defenders and sort of those big men at the back that you like Scott Dan and Craig Dawson were particular
Oh,
faves of yours. And I do
Duffy.
remember, yeah, Duffy, of course, as well. And I do remember in season one, actually, of the podcast, one of our favourites, Matt Doherty, had dropped a couple of price points, hadn't he? And then he was really statting well, and he was one of the early call outs that we did on that podcast. And also, we obviously talked about lots of sort of the assists as well. We didn't necessarily go into the XG side of things that like people love to talk about these days, or the XGA, but we talked about basic chances created and big chances created, and the likes of Sterling and Salah at the time were kind of the big returners in that kind of data points. But now I think, whilst it was a niche subject back in the day, stats and data is just so big in the world, and also in general. I think with FPL and how it's evolved when we first started the podcast as well, like the Twitter community, there was a sort of emerging Twitter community, and it was only kind of becoming like a concept. People started using it just around that point, because before that everyone was kind of mainly just using fantasy football scouts, and other things like the YouTubers didn't really exist. I think that first season we started, Andy was just kicking off, and websites like the Hub as well were only just starting as well, and also the FPL show. So it's really evolved since we kind of first kicked off the WGTA pod. That's sort of like 9 years back.
Yeah, yeah, we used to do all sorts. Like, we did Talisman Theory, which I only stopped doing a couple of years ago. There was Gasto in the chat just mentioned it as well, which was kind of looking at kind of solely FPL points, and the person scoring the most FPL points would therefore be the talisman. And we kind of did like a nice little proof of that. We used to write basically a lot more than, well, don't write at all now. I used to write, didn't we? And do something like the selfishness index was one of your favorites, and a few other bits and pieces like that. But XG, I did kind of have a look back earlier on, and the first year that XG is actually recorded on FBref, for example, was actually the year we started, 2017-18. Before that, it didn't exist. And it was stuff like, looking at Pembots touches. It was stuff like shots in the box and big chances, which was, of course, a bit of something which is pilloried a lot in the analytic community. But we really were sort of hunting bears when it came to trying to understand exactly where the numbers were coming from and what sort of players were of interest to us. And I suppose it was a little bit more because of the community being quite fledgling, and because of the fact that content creation as it was really sort of taking up, really sort of taking off. It wasn't sort of where it is now, where I end and you begin. We have the same team. Really, it was back then a lot more. There was a lot more variation, a lot more sort of gut feel stuff, and kind of the grass side of it. That sort of more, I suppose, instinctive way of playing FPL was really sort of the paramount way of doing it, and any information was good information. Whereas now you've got such a saturation of information, perhaps, that you go the other way, don't you, Nick? And it can be quite like, there are loads more voices now than there ever were before. But in some ways, I don't know. Maybe it makes FPL seem more legitimized. Like when we started it, I don't think anyone really kind of knew what FPL was, especially around the office or anything like that. It was seen as quite like a little kind of a bit of a nerdy sort of weird preoccupation, and it may still be. And to be honest, it probably is. But it's become a lot more mainstream than ever before, hasn't it?
Yeah, definitely, and you know you see it in the media as well. Like BBC talk about FPL, and Sky Sports start showing FPL data on Sky Sports News as well. Like all of that's kind of obviously emerged in the last few years. Whilst when we started, it was very niche. But now you know there's huge work leagues and everyone's involved. So definitely, it has grown massively since we started doing the pods. I was just remembering as well, going back to the data point, you know, the prospects articles we did as well, like when we were looking at the players that are
Oh
joining the
God.
Premier League, or we're looking at who was, I can't remember, it was like some really odd people like Max Aarons and stuff. We were like, he did well in the Championship, he's going to do absolutely brilliant in Premier League. But so
Well, I remember doing.
there's a few dud picks in there as well, but Salah, I think we did one on as well because he just joined Liverpool and trying to identify those players early. And who's the other one? Vincente Iborra. That was another one that I did one on when he
Oh,
joined
it was,
Leicester that I had high
oh,
hopes for.
boring.
But
I remember I was on
yeah,
the caravan holiday in Devon, and I remember like going out because I'd written it on my laptop, and I like uploaded the website on my phone. I remember walking out into a field to find 2 bars of signal to upload an article about Will Hughes, who just
the
joined. Who
amazing
just
Will
joined.
Hughes. Yeah.
Yeah, he just joined Palace. I mean, it obviously turned out to be good, but I think at the time, we were just like, oh, he's got he created something like 4 chances a game in the Championship for Watford. Therefore, I think he went actually to go to Watford, but he created 4 chances. I think he was at Derby before, so it's 4 chances a game. Therefore, he might be worth looking at, and it is absolutely kind of It was super like that kind of really halcyon days when it was. I don't know. It felt like back then there was a lot more kind of new stuff to talk about, whereas now we've kind of I don't know started pushing the frontier a bit. I think on what you can actually talk about week to week, and a lot of the time, I do feel like it is. There are lots of similarities, I suppose, like with the past. Haven't done this for so long. There's lots of recurring themes, aren't there, Nick? I mean, let's move let's move that up to now. So I think it kind of nicely segues into it. Like we were talking about this earlier on, and like the first season, that was Salah's first season, and it was him, Firmino, and was it Adam Lallana making up the red roulette at Liverpool? And we were kind of had this whole theory, didn't we, that it would be a nice dream to have all 3 of them, but it was all about kind of having the red roulette of one of them, or at least 2 of them going off every week. And it feels like that might come again this year with obviously Liverpool having quite a few okay options, Ekatike, Salah, obviously, Gakpo, maybe Isaac if he joins, which is seeming likely at the time of recording. And obviously also, when we first thought about this, Man United with Cunha, Bumo and Bruno Fernandes.
Yeah, and also Philippe Coutinho, you didn't mention as well. He was a key member of that Red Roulette, and then it
I
evolved. And
forgot about
obviously,
him.
Sadio Mane obviously joined, and then there was the kind of do you own Sadio Mane or do you own Mo Salah? But the whole kind of message was don't transfer sideways as much as possible. And I think this season, I feel like there's almost 3 Red Roulettes that are going to emerge. In Liverpool, I think in the last 4 or 5 seasons, there's only been one man that you want to own in FPL. It's obviously Mo Salah. But this year, it definitely feels like there's going to be a lot more variance. I think everyone was kind of on Salah for the game week 1 and the first few game weeks, and it kind of made sense. But when you look back now, you kind of compare his price to the other guys in that team. You've got Gakpo, obviously, you've got Ekitike. Florian Wirtz was the other one that a lot of people owned, and I still own, but obviously he's not quite got going yet, but he could potentially feature quite heavily as an option in FPL. And then there's this big question mark over Isaac, whether he joins or not. But he will definitely, I can imagine him being that key talisman at Liverpool, and kind of Salah, obviously, you don't know, you never write off Salah, but he started a little slow this season. And is he worth the 14.5 million? I think people are starting to question that.
Yeah, I mean that first year he was 9.5, wasn't he? So it wasn't really
Yeah.
a question as much. And for Firmino was midfielder as well, wasn't he? It was Firmino,
hmm
Coutinho, and Salah were all midfielders. I remember selling Salah in game week 3 for a Charlison. That sort of craziness, the sort of thing I was doing in the first year. But that's sort of, I suppose like trying to figure out exactly who the main pick is going to be in kind of a glut of picks within one particular team, something you see quite a lot. And you also kind of see, I don't know whether this is still true, but you still always see that there's one particular flavor of the week that everyone's talking up, everyone's going wild about. Hi, Suj. So Suj mentioned on the Planet FPL last week I was listening to, that Reinders, just people hadn't spoken about him at all in lead up to game week in the lead up to game week 3, whereas after game week 1 he was all the rage. And I feel like this sort of need to continually churn out content is why we kind of eventually stopped writing, just because during the season it just became so difficult to dedicate time as a free pod or a non-working pod back then. And I completely appreciate why people have to do that if you're in the FPL community and you've got to do kind of create content in order to keep views, in order to run your business and things like that. But I don't know, because as I said earlier on, there's that sort of saturation point now. You do kind of feel like every week the judgment is so incumbent upon you more than ever before to be able to, I guess, sort of figure out who's the red herring and who's the who we're going to kind of who's going to be like your superhero effectively that week, and who's going to be like sort of longer term pick in your team. I don't know, man. I'm guessing it was like that when we were playing, but now it just feels like so much more relevant. Like you've got the time frame on a player like Matt Doherty. We had probably about 3 or 4 weeks when we had them, and it took a while for everybody to catch on. But given how things have changed now, it just takes 1 week for a player to do well, and suddenly everyone's on them, right?
Definitely, and I feel like there is also an element of the content creator's curse. So when we first started, you'd been a very, very successful FPL manager. I didn't have as much experience in the game, but I think you'd come off the back of a sort of a 2.5k finish, sort of around 12k as well. And then you really struggled, I think, in that first season. We did the pod just because of your over management. So you were absorbing so much information, you were writing so much data all the time. I think you were just over transferring. And that first example you highlighted, actually, when that game week 3 is a perfect example of selling Salah. After he'd had a great start and bringing in Richarlison, I'd actually kept Salah, and that was probably the start of a convergence of ranks in that first season. We did the pod just because you were spending so much time on social media as well and absorbing all this information constantly. And I feel like now there's more information than ever out there. You just have to try and manage it and try and take in little bits here and there, but not not constantly dedicate your entire life to this, because you can win the game by just looking at it 5 minutes a day, 5 minutes a week, even potentially. That's all you really need to do to dedicate to actually play the game and potentially even win it.
I do feel like that's right, but I feel like the more engaged managers out there definitely is a more sort of, I suppose, like in terms of those sort of risk profile things we used to do and talk about risk appetite and everything like that. There definitely was, at least in the past, this sort of like way in which you could churn out consistently good results. Thinking of the likes of Joe from Fantasy Football Scout, thinking of the likes of Matthew Jones from Hub, like just able to kind of consistently churn out top 100k finishes just through playing it safe, playing conservatively, playing boring. And I suppose you're right in that to some extent it was playing to the gallery a little bit, and also kind of overthinking it, and being part of that sort of social media sphere, and the over management became a big sort of part in what I did, and it's still to this day I still kind of have lost perhaps the conviction in the moves that I make. I've had a couple of good seasons, and quite a few terrible seasons doing WGTA, as you know, and I don't know. I suppose risk profile still plays a big part in FPL, but it definitely does feel like, and we'll get onto algorithms in a minute. The fact is that that sort of risk has really sort of become a lot more dampened overall, just through the fact that you've got lots of leading voices who have sort of covered that, as well as getting kind of good variants, I suppose, in and out.
Yeah, definitely. I think, going back to risk profiles, that was another common theme from our first sort of 5 years of doing the pod. We like to kind of do that analysis around sort of the game week 30 point, where we're looking at how many hits a man is kind of an arbitrary way of doing it, but looking at how many hits a manager had taken and kind of creating a risk profile based on how many transfers and how many hits they'd taken. But it was quite interesting doing that analysis, because you would see people, for instance, that hadn't taken a single hit all season, but they were sitting pretty in the top 5K. Then you could see people who maybe even taken 10, 20 hits at that point, and also some of them were doing exceptionally well. So it just goes to show that there are multiple ways to play the game. You can be highly engaged, looking at all the data points, doing transfers early, taking hits where required, and be very, very successful at the game. But you can also have that kind of more laid back approach, I suppose, where you may do a transfer, you may not, you have a little bit more trust in your players. I've always leaned towards that side. I think even looking at this season, for instance, I'm sitting on Bowen and Verts. You've got rid of Verts. You obviously potentially made the right call there, because he did take a knock in that last game. But if you had Bowen, obviously you had Fulkrug, you sold Fulkrug. If you had Bowen, I reckon you would have sold him, and you'd have missed out on the return tonight. But I've shown a bit more patience than I always kind of have with certain players, even if it's to the detriment and then not looking in form. And as I said, that's just a different playing style to someone who perhaps is more kind of looking at things more regularly, and kind of making decisions based on like absorb that content.
No, I think I just have a greater risk appetite than you, to better or worse. I think I definitely had a couple of years before we did the pod, which probably, I guess, very pushed us over the edge of doing the pods in the first place. Where those risks had all come off, all that sort of quote unquote upside chasing, like everything had worked for me. And then I tried to carry that into sort of doing an FPL podcast with kind of the feeling like I had to play to the gallery a little bit. And then here we were, a lot later, just being like, oh, this is actually a lot more difficult than I thought. And I suppose in terms of how we've changed as managers, you've always been quite we say that the Nick pick was kind of roaring on a 0-0, being quite kind of conservative as well in many ways. Small C, I mean, don't come for me. Don't get your knives out. But still, I mean, it was definitely a way that you always did play the game. It did sort of suit you a little bit more. But since you've kind of obviously had your two kids and stepped away from full-time kind of content creation, as it were, you've kind of taken a slightly different approach, haven't you? And last year, I think, was kind of a return to form after a couple of years in the wilderness.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, after stopping the podcast, I kind of just drifted a little bit away from FPL, and I think I just got a little bit of football fatigue, especially with all that sort of the England tournaments. So I got heavily invested in the European tournaments over the summer, and England obviously getting to the final rounds of tournaments, but getting knocked out in the finals and everything. It kind of felt a little bit, when the Premier League seasons were about to start a few weeks later, I wasn't that engaged and just needed a break from it all. But then, yeah, last season I was planning on kind of not being engaged again, and somehow lucked into a successful start. And luck is obviously something else we were going to talk about a little bit, because it's like, this is a game of luck ultimately. There are always cases in every single game which huge turning points, and none of us can predict this. Not even algorithms can predict, for instance, a dodgy VAR call in the Chelsea Fulham game over the weekend, or a weldy free kick from Szoboszlai. These are kind of like, we were talking a little bit about football being a game of moments earlier, weren't we? And those kind of moments do affect FPL, and it's just, that is where that luck element comes into the game, which none of us can ultimately predict. As much, we'd like to obviously look at data as much as we can, but it's just not in there. It's just impossible to kind of call these sort of particular moments. And obviously another one would be that hamstring injury for Cunha versus a last minute penalty for Bruno. You just can't legislate for these sort of things.
No, no. But that was ever thus, I think. But I think the kind of the main sort of changes, I think there's two of them. One was kind of the growth and ultimate explosion of content creatordom, and which created in itself its own sort of copycat sort of effect, where there was one year where basically, I think in my former work mini league, you had for about 6 or 7 guys who all had Andy's team and just had the same team as Andy every week, apart from the weeks where he started hiding what he was doing until the game, the deadline was over. That was kind of 3 or 4 years ago, and now we've got the advent of algorithms, and even then, you can see kind of straight away, like who's playing using algos and who isn't, because it's just so obvious. There's a few sort of particular players in their particular team or in kind of the moves they make. Like, for example, this week I could tell immediately in my work mini league there's one person I know who's using Solio or FPL Review because he took a hit to bring in Gyökeres. Which would kind of just make no sense to anybody unless you've used the algorithms and you know that they are all creaming themselves over Gyökeres. So this might be a time to do it, because he kind of, I think, I'm sure there was something in his team that meant he had to take minus 4. But a question from our friend Mitchell, who used to help me on Talisman Theory ahead of this pod, heard that you were coming on, Nick, and said, without pissing on the community's chips, is there something about kind of melding copyright content copycats and review out there? How many players kind of are kind of doing all of this, and what do you think of it, and how much has that changed FPL in your view over the last few years? Because it's definitely something which has sort of grown. Like, I think Sam's a lot more into it than I am. I think I do use it a fair bit just as a consultative voice. Sam does as well. Sam's obviously a bit. I think Sam was part of like the beta for Solo, and he definitely believes in it. All of that a little bit more than me to some extent. I don't want to speak for him because he's not here. Whereas I think I've still got sort of a healthy sort of skepticism. Maybe it's a learnt thing where I kind of like to own it. I don't know. But yeah, it definitely wasn't around when we were pulling together, Nick. I mean, what's your view on it now it's kind of here in the mainstream?
Yeah, I mean, I've never used algorithms. I've always just kind of made my own decisions when it comes to my FPL team. I think, it is one way to play the game. And it is a shame if you just let the algorithm just completely dictate the way you play. And I do believe actually it is just the equivalent of just carbon copying the exact team of a popular FPL account. So for instance, I think, Harry or Raptor or whatever were doing particularly well one of the years, and there was about 100 people with the exact same team right at the top with them, and that was just ridiculous. And I do think I do think if you are just copying a model and just following exactly what it says to do, then you're not really playing. You're just kind of outsourcing your team to another source. And yeah, I understand like there are some people that are heavily wedded to the models, and there's some extremely smart guys that have actually created some of these models, but without going under the fence of understanding what it's exactly telling me, I'm just happy just personally just to continue to rely on my own observations and intuitions, and I find it a much more enjoyable way to play. And this season it is a bit weird, like some of these really unexplainable picks, like a Gyökeres for a hit kind of makes it seems like it's like 2 + 2 = 5, isn't it? Like how does that even work? He's got Liverpool away. Like I personally think Gyökeres is going to have a great season, and he's someone I'm looking at in a couple of weeks' time, potentially when I'm wildcarding. But right now, that was not a sensible move to make, and I just don't understand the logic behind that particular one, and some of the other players that you see in every single team. Like there's always a few oddballs. Like last season, I just remember Dunk being on the bench for like tons of people, and I'm like, why is everyone got Dunk 4.5 Brighton player, the same guy on their teams? And it was just because that was essentially the algorithm's favorite pick at the time. But my personal opinion is just like everyone's welcome to kind of use it if they want to supplement their planning, but just use it as a tool. Don't just completely rely on it. Look at what's actually happening on the pitch, kind of going full without going full grass FC. There's so much going on that you can see in terms of players and their confidences and their relationships with managers and fans that sometimes isn't captured in some of these things. And I know I'm not so arrogant that I think I'm better than a model, but I just prefer to play it my own way. And if I succeed, then it's my success, not just an algorithm success.
I know what you mean. There's just something that's very pure FPL about the feeling that I'm on a roll this time. I feel my luck could change, that you feel like you're really sort of getting into it. And I don't know, as FPL has sort of changed and evolved, with FPL content created when that created a bit of a herd, and it still kind of does these days. Um, you kind of felt like it was you versus whose army almost, when you were kind of taking on one person or taking on sort of the whole sort of thinking about you versus that kind of the general sort of EO threats you have in your team and so on and so forth, because it really sort of does alter the way the game is played, where you have a lot of people effectively, I don't know, there used to be this sort of template was very strong, and it was strong for a reason or two. It hasn't kind of happened this year, maybe due to the raft of changes, maybe due to the fact we had lots of chips to play, which set people on different paths, which is fine. We'll talk about it in a minute. But I do think this sort of sense of universalism does still persist with people who do use the algos, and I think there's a bit of a kind of a reservation for that throughout the course of the season. That feeling of being packed like sardines in an old tin box, because we see so many of the same people making the same moves and same changes, and in many ways, I'm not singling out anyone here. From a content creator perspective, if that is indeed what we still are, passing off kind of FPL review and Solio data as your own thinking a lot of the time as well, and that never fails to annoy me a little bit. 'Cause it's just like, well, where are you in all this? Maybe speaking to your point earlier on about making your own decisions, and I don't know. It's quite funny because you kind of had a lot of people who don't like to follow the content creator advice are basically all following the algo, and it kind of feels like it's ironic that it's all gone this sort of it's all gone full circle effectively, and you're off doing this cool thing where you're not following kind of what your average man on the street, woman on the street, whatever is saying, and broadcasting. Instead, I'm looking at some data for myself and messing with a few sliders, and then hey, you know what? I'm passing that off as me kind of I don't know. It is very, very odd to me still, despite the fact that I do quite like it. I do use them, and it has been a disruptive force in the FPL world. And I totally respect people who use and follow them religiously. I've spoken about with when Simon FPL, and this has been on the pod in the past, and with Sam, who we both sort of do look at them. It's certainly not the case that when I am king, you'll be first against the wall. But I guess the point, I suppose, when I think about it, to put it out there neutrally, is that ironically they've all basically become a version of grass FC managers. So many people do sort of look down on, because the spoon feeding just comes from a different place, right? From on high, ringing its morning bell and passing down what it deems to be the best way forward through solvers. It just feels like it's the same thing, just kind of a different source. And that in of itself just makes me think, well, I don't know, what are your motivations for playing, I suppose, which is like my motivation for playing was always just to kind of have fun effectively and add a little something to the football. And obviously the motivation for starting a podcast wasn't to make money, which kind of nowadays is sort of the main thing for a lot of people to be involved. No, I've got no sort of compunctions about that as well. People are free to do what they like. But it does seem a bit strange if you're playing FPL and you're not really playing anymore. Is the way I sort of still feel about it, despite the fact that I completely respect why people should use it. I don't know. Maybe that's me. I'm rambling on a bit, Nick, but you get what I mean, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, ultimately, I feel like I'm fitter, happier, more productive by playing the game like in a natural way, as opposed to just letting an algorithm dictate my moves. And I'm so much happier playing that way. And each to their own. But I'm not a content creator anymore. I'm essentially retired from that game. So if I'm going to be successful at FPL, I want to, not feel like my success was just caused by just following blindly what a AI algorithm told me to do. And if that now makes me me a dinosaur, even though we were a pioneer of stats, then so be it. I'll happily accept anyone that wants to call me that.
We were the future once, Nick. That's the way it always is. And I suppose you've got to evolve with the times. And I do use these things. I just kind of still question the motivation of how it can be fun to be fiddling with a few sliders, changing a few minutes, and passing that off as your own thought. It just kind of, yeah, something somewhere has to come from you, and from your kind of your own thinking. And maybe that kind of is based outside of the virtual world and kind of you just thinking about it. I don't know. I'm sure. I think as we came to the conclusion on the pod that Simon came on, that everyone's kind of trying to do the same thing. It's just using different methods, and maybe it's just because I'm a product of a different era. I'm not Gen Z, Nick. I'm a millennial, and this is how millennials did it. God damn it! But yeah, definitely has kind of changed from an era of no alarms, no surprises. We all had the same sort of things at our disposal, and now it kind of feels like we kind of all kind of, it's all horses for courses. We all kind of take things from our own different sort of areas. um it's just when you see, as you said, like everyone with the same team, or everyone making the same transfers, or everyone doing the same thing, outside of kind of just a herd thing, that's what kind of gets me a little bit when it's sort of off the wall picks, and maybe that's kind of just, as I said, mate, just us being a dinosaur. But hey ho. Another thing I just want to kind of mention as well, back when we started, I think kind of, remember the old thing, top 100K. But I remember we had Adam Hotcroft on one year, and he was just like, yeah, top 100K by Christmas, and then top 10K is just, that's just how I do it every year. And top 10K was like the thing that everyone wanted back then. And maybe it's to do with the player base, maybe it's to do with how the game's evolves, and algos, and everybody using content creators, and people copycatting all over the place. But I don't know. Do you think the top 100K finish now is kind of where acceptability now is? Top 10K is always sort of the aim, um, but at the end of the day, I just kind of feel like you're probably going to be all right if you've had your top 100K finish. I mean, I think that's I had that years ago, and I was more than happy with that.
Yeah, I think top 100K. It's still, I wouldn't be happy if I finished in the top 100K. I'd say it was acceptable, but I wouldn't necessarily be happy if you're outside the top 100K. I would say it's a poor season. If you're sort of 50 to 100K, I would say it's an acceptable season. 25 to 50K, good season. 10 to 25, great season. Above 10, in the top 10K, you've had a fantastic season. That's how I kind of rank it in my head. And I know that the player base is growing. When I think we first started the podcast, it was over the million point, but it wasn't much above that. Now it's in the sort of like, I'm not even sure what it is, but it's definitely sort of like above 10 million, 11 million
Yeah,
now.
something like that.
But of those are a lot of those end up being dead teams anyway. A lot of people drop out, and by the late points in the season, you probably still only have about sort of 500K to 1 million actually sort of engaged managers playing the game. So I was still kind of, I would still say that, if you've got in the top 100K, you should be happy, but we go again basically and see if you can improve on it the next year. It's not going to be anything to kind of get you the Twitter likes or the follows, is it? It's just kind of a very average season from a community perspective, I suppose.
God, that's the proper gloaming there for you, Nick. I just kind of feel like, because of how the fact that the player base of I guess the kind of the nucleus of engaged managers has propagated so far since when we started. I do think that it'd be interesting to, if I ever got a TARDIS, I don't think I'd do anything particularly fun. I'd probably go back to 2008, 2009 and play an FPL season or something like that with the knowledge that I've got now. I'd be at uni, so I'd still have loads of fun. But I'd play the FPL season with the knowledge I've got now. Hopefully I'd also have a few team leagues. But, and play with the knowledge I've got now. And see how that would go. Just because I don't know. I just feel like when there were less people playing, it was perhaps slightly easier to get a good rank. And if you just add a lot of people into that scenario who are equipped with the tools to play well, yeah, I feel like it's not kind of it's not easy to get that kind of high rank. It's probably still kind of just about doable season after season to get to 100K, unless you're some sort of subterranean homesick alien like a Ben Krellin or something like that, who's just able to get a top 10K rank every year. Yeah, he uses the algos, but every now and again, there's just one or two really, really good bits of luck. Same with Harry as well, to be fair. But I don't know. For me, I feel like some years you're very good, and then you fade out again, and it's not as easy the next year. And it's just about sort of grasping the nettle of that particular season time after time. And I do get it. And if I start well, I think it's fine. If I don't start well, especially when it comes to this season, things become a lot more difficult. And the aim kind of rapidly diminishes from top 10K at the very start. If you do have a good start, you're probably okay, to top 100K. And the degradation from this could be a really good season to it could be acceptable is probably very, very quick now, because the amount of people who have equipped with so much more information than it was when we started, right? I remember one Christmas, we had a Christmas meetup, didn't we? And you were just like at the top 20K, like really, really fast. And it was just like, well, my work here is almost done because unless I absolutely screw it myself, I think I'm probably going to be all right. And that's probably the best position to be in. But getting there is just so difficult. Like, if you think things go your way, it was ever thus, but with more people doing more things, Nick, I just feel like it's harder than ever before.
Yeah, it's always a nice dream to kind of go back and think about those halcyon days when FPL just began. Obviously, just bringing Clint Dempsey and captain him, or maybe meet you early on, and you would do well, and that's all you needed to know. These kind of odd players that were just FPL darlings from that time. It's just some fantastic memories. And yeah, as you said, last season, I had a bit of luck. I was on a roll, like with Cole Palmer, getting that captain, putting him captaincy on him when he got those 4 goals, and that just propelled me up the ranks. And once you're up there, you're in that position. All you need to just do is hold the door, essentially, just maintain that position, and then that's how it kind of worked out for me last year. And we've always talked about on the podcast the importance of a good start. Unfortunately, in reality, it often is out of your control, those good starts, and it almost feels like, maybe yourself more than me, we're already chasing ranks and looking for differentials against the template to try and catch up already, which is a little bit of an uncomfortable place to be, especially now, as we were talking about this. There's so many new players and more people using algorithms and whatnot, that you're just chasing constantly to try and catch up. But I think, that kind of segues us a little bit onto some of the new changes from this season and how we think that will affect things. And personally, I'm quite a big fan of the new changes. I quite like the fact that this time round we've got an extra free hit, an extra bench boost. We've virtually got an extra wild card with the AFCON game week, and we've got an extra triple captain, of course, as well. And I feel like that gives you that extra dimension to try and catch up with people early doors. So even after a horrific game week 1, I free hitted immediately, and that was kind of a little bit of an early boost to kind of get me to try and get me back aligned. And also the addition this season as well, which I think will be really good for the engaged managers, is the introduction of the DEFCONs. And I think even so even already, like, lots of people who kind of took gambles and brought in someone like Tarko from Everton, and have had a great start because of that. And playing those extra cards that the engaged managers have are going to be vital if we want to kind of stay on top and finish up with good ranks against sort of like the masses, let's say.
Yeah, yeah. The problem is that by the time that if I because I've had a bit of a poor start and there's no one to pull me out of the air crash, maybe a free hit. Well, my free hit's already active. Spoiler for next week. I may have wildcard in the game week 6. For example, versus Sam, who's going to have used no chips and he's already kind of 15, 20 points ahead of me. I think that's sort of the interesting part of what the introduction of the new of kind of double chips has done, because it has sort of created different scenarios, different people, and it has disrupted the whole template effectively beyond sort of those who are following other people's or AI's sort of laid out strategy. And it's notable that at the start of the year, looking at the kind of the cavalcade of bastards on live FPL, as I like to call it, and hat tip to Mitchell for that one, that this week, for example, I went Canu over Bruno. Yeah, okay, Tiny Violin comes out. But when I looked at kind of what that actually did to me, any other year, Nick, any other year, I think that would have been a killer. Like Bruno, maybe it's due to the start of the season as well. Maybe it's due to Bruno's missed penalty last week, etc., etc. But I looked at his sort of effective ownership, Bruno, when I could bring myself to look at live FPL again. I think it's probably after Dewsbury Hall scored his goal. And so the effective ownership was like 29%, and my rank, which obviously it's a rank which is difficult to say in 2 syllables, apart from really shit. But yeah, and all around, I think every week, basically all of your players. This week, Nick, all of my players are under 100% EO. I think maybe that kind of shows the kind of the good impact of having multiple chips in play. Maybe it's just due to the start of the season being there, but I'm hoping that this sort of continues, that we have a bit of an exploded sense of template, but everyone's going to be in a slightly different situation, which started last year. The kind of, it was all set in train last year with 5 free transfers being available. But I think now more than ever, I'm hoping at least we're not in that idiotech world where we're all sat there with the same team and it's all down to sort of your your fourth defender doing something, and it's now more the case that you can pick and choose your team, your players according to your strategy or according to your kind of convictions, and not be punished too hard for it. I don't know. I agree with you. I really like it, and it's really. I said that kind of with Sam at the start of this the preseason. I think it's interesting to think about it now, just because these things are definitely sort of, I suppose, coming home to roost a little bit, even though we're only kind of 3 game weeks in. Zod in the chat mentioned earlier on about DEF CONs, that he heard people talking about DEF CONs, just out and about, and it's incredible, really, isn't it? How far this sort of this thing has perpetuated the FPL sort of world, the FPL zeitgeist, and it's how it's sort of expanded outwards. I fundamentally think it's a good thing. Probably did err a little bit in terms of choosing Murillo, for example, who does seem to have been a bit of a fraud thus far in terms of DEFCONs. But overall, it's been a nice little kind of benefit, hasn't it? A nice sort of cheeky positive. For example, with a player like Tosin this week, they got their clean sheet, but hey, you know what? There's an extra couple of points there with the DEFCONs. That's brilliant. It's very, very handy and very, very nice, effectively, to have more routes to points than ever before. And I think that's what DEFCONs does. It brings certain players into the conversation compared to others. I think it's Vandenberg and Senesi are 2. I'm sure there's one more who have hit DEFCONs every single week. Absolutely wild, but I think that's really cool.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is. It adds an extra dimension to the game. I remember one time we got us getting funny looks because we cheered a Rob Elliott save in the pub. Now I'm cheering. Now I'm cheering every Virgil van Dijk header and block that he does. I said yes. Everyone must think I'm a Liverpool fan around my neighbourhood because I'm constantly cheering when they block when Virgil or someone does
How
a block.
loud are you
So
cheering?
I
How
was,
loud are you
I was
cheering?
watching it. I was watching it in my garden earlier. So it's just, yeah, I probably sound like a massive Liverpool fan because every weekend, I think when Salah scored that last minute goal on the first Friday night, I screamed out loud as well. So yeah, but it's good. Yeah, it does add that extra dimension to FPL, and when you're watching the games as well, it's something else to look out for. And it also adds a few extra players to the game as well. Casado's another one, a ridiculous amount of defensive contributions in the last game, and also affects, like, if you play draft, it kind of brings in these extra characters like, as I said, Casado or Rice or Elliot Anderson that perhaps wouldn't be in our FPL teams, and Bruno Fernandes as well, playing a deeper role, but actually then you've got that extra dimension of the DEFCONs. So he kind of then we weigh that in and factor that into your decision making. That was one of the reasons why I captained him as well, was just because of mainly penalties and DEFCONs over someone like Cunha and Bumo, because I felt like there were just more routes to points, and it's just adding that extra element to the game I find really interesting.
Yeah, I think that's great because it was so slow for many, many years. Like, it was literally just last year that we really saw change happen. Did we start when all out attack was a thing, or did free hit begin when we were working?
Oh,
When we started
yeah.
WGTA, sorry.
Yeah, All Out Attack. I think it was the first season of Chips. I think it was the first season of Chips. It was the first year we did the pods, and it was All Out Attack, Triple Captain, and Bench Boost. Then All Out Attack was later replaced by Free Hit. All Out Attack was a fun chip, but I don't think it really worked very well. Kind of blew up in your face mostly every time you tried to use it. So
Yeah,
that
that
one
let you use your
died a
entire
death.
front eight. It let you use your entire front eight, didn't it, one week? Yeah,
Mhm.
not particularly helpful, that one. So yeah, free hit was absolutely fine. But yeah, I mean, like, it was only last year when we got the 5 free transfers that really sort of
Yeah,
revolutionised it, and it's really cool to see kind of, I guess, them actually starting to change, because I don't know, just for so long it just felt so stale, didn't it? Like, season after season, and the whole, like, the template became, especially in some years, like, that year with Bruno, Son, Salah, and Kane, for example, where you just kind of had them from, if you had them from the start, you were basically fine. There was nothing you could really do. If you'd had them from the start of the year and you'd done well, you're probably going to be all right. And if you didn't have them, like, it was quite difficult to find ways and means to kind of assault that and kind of make your position better. I'm just hoping that this year does sort of continue to evolve in a way where you can kind of have everything in its right place according to what you think, and you can still find a way to do well. or at least sort of, I don't know, in my case, probably have one good week, because everyone is still the case that you don't really need too much to have to go from, like, I've seen a few people this week, for example, going from like 4 million to kind of 800k with a really good week. And I think that at the start of the year, that's a good time to do that. You just forget about it, don't you? As the season sort of, if a season sort of meld into each other, and as things sort of kind of become like every week. Like if you ask me, Nick, what happened this time last year, I couldn't tell you, honestly. I'd have no idea who the players were. I'd have to look back and try to put myself in there, in that sort of scenario again, to try to figure out exactly what we were looking at. Because it does move along so fast, doesn't it? It does change so fast. Even though we've got the international break come in, it doesn't take very much to leave you high and leave you dry, does it? If kind of you're in one team, or at least there's kind of a whole set of players or a whole sort of individuals who are really kind of hot one week, the next time you look at it, you may just be like, well, that's not like that anymore. So I don't know. I think new changes are very good, and I hope this year is going to kind of be the ultimate sort of anti-template year, or at least kind of see the weakest template I've ever seen.
Yeah, definitely. I think, the start of the season is always very, very unpredictable. And it was the same last season a little bit. Like I had like sort of Nkunku and Barco in my team, and obviously they ended up being completely dead FPL assets. But then as I talked about wildcarding in Game Week 3, getting ahead of that template before it forms, I do feel is very important. And I expect at some point there will be a template that forms. But I think this season as well, outside of FPL, has been very unpredictable in terms of some of the results that you've seen from the likes of Manchester City, and some, the results today, for instance, you were just perfect examples of West Ham beating Nottingham Forest 3-0, City losing to Brighton. We've seen Sunderland start really well. We've seen Aston Villa be absolutely terrible, and you are a Watkins man, but I'm sure you're probably thinking about your plans there, if they can recover or not. But I think it will be very interesting to see how this evolves and how FPL evolves as well in the future.
Yeah. So I suppose, kind of, how do you think it's going to kind of change in the future, Nick? I mean, where's it go next? Is it just going to be that, I know though it's really started to happen where you have kind of the goal shows talking about the fantasy element, and obviously in the US you've always got one, maybe two fantasy American football people on the panel, whenever there's a ludicrously large panel when American football's on. There's about 11 or 12 people, and there's always going to be one or two who talk about fantasy football. Like, how far integrated can it get before it is seen as woke, do you think?
I don't know. I think it's going to be. I think there's going to be more integration as well of AI and data analytics on the website. And I think that, haven't used it. I don't know if you used it, but I suppose there's like an AI chat or something that you can use to help you with your teams, which is just probably just some sort of like chats GPT clone that they've built into the website. But I think I expect to see kind of more of that in the future. And as you said, perhaps we'll see halftime interviews with Odegaard being asked about, oh, you're on 3 points in FPL. Oh, you've done 6 DEFCON so far. Are you going to get another 4 in the match or something ridiculous? I really hope not, because I think that would definitely be an example of going too woke, as Sean Dyche likes to say.
I do like the fact they've made loads of changes. I think that there are a few they're never going to change. It feels like kind of stuff like the quality of life around how players rise and fall in price. I don't think that's going to change anytime going forward. I feel like they're kind of going to keep that to themselves. But I do wonder whether there are going to be things like, I don't know. So think about Fantasy Bundesliga. You still get points for players kind of creating chances. So you get for shot assists, you get players kind of getting points for winning duels as well in the game, which is obviously a bit of a contentious thing, which I think is kind of quite hard to judge. So I'm not a big fan of that. Successful dribbles, successful kind of long passes, or successful sort of passes, which is like kind of key passes and things like that. There are loads of ways they could kind of go with it. It's just whether, I don't know what you think. Like, how far do you think it can possibly go without kind of losing its core fabric of being quite a simple pick 'em up game? Because there has been that sort of pushback to DEFCONs, which I do understand. A lot of people just don't like it because it kind of diminishes what FPL is, which is a very simple game. But the anoraks among us really like it because, as you said earlier on, it's like there are more routes to points than ever before, and plus it kind of increases that sort of probability of a player who you don't particularly care about. Let's think about Lacroix or something like that, suddenly becoming really interesting to you because of the fact that they can pump out 8 pointers. Or in this week, he got an assist as well, didn't he? So Darius sitting on an 11 pointer plus maybe bonus as well. Like it doesn't take very much for a defender to suddenly come into the game and become really interesting, a player that we never would have thought about before. So, Nick, as the father of Big at the Back, is Big at the Back back?
Yeah, I would say it is. I think with the introduction of the DEFCONs, I certainly can see a push back towards having maybe like a sort of a 4-4-2 sort of or a 4-3-3 type formation in FPL. And we are seeing a lot of those defenders. Chalobah was the other one this weekend that kind of got multiple points through DEFCONs and clean sheets and bonus as well, and assist as well. So he also massively hauled, and he was someone that I was calling out as a good pick this week. But I think it's quite interesting this week when you say Big at the Back, because the defensive pitch has completely changed. Like the highest price defender this season is 6 million, and to go from a full 4.5.6 million, it doesn't take that much money to kind of go those extra yards and spend a little bit more money. And I've always been a strong advocate of defenders and 90-minute men in centre backs. Like as I said, I've got big Virgil van Dijk in my team, and I think he could be a season keeper if he keeps getting those DEFCONs, and the likes of Tarko as well. He's virtually become a premium defender this season just because of the fact that he gets so many DEFCONs, can get the odd goal as well. So I think certainly I would be an advocate this season for Big at the Back, and Big at the Back potentially is back. It's a shame, obviously, there's no premium defenders like Trent Alexander-Arnold, but no one could even afford him at all last season. So I think it doesn't take much money to spend a little bit of extra cash to get the likes of Gabriel, to get the likes of Virgil van Dijk, and just keep them and not change it all season.
Oh, maybe you are more of an algo man than you thought, Nick, because expected minutes is basically the key to what makes FPL successful according to the algos. You know, just making sure your player's on the pitch to do everything else at the end of the day.
I don't need the
And
algo, it's all in my head.
Nick the computer. Okay, computer. Fine. It absolutely makes sense to me. It is, I don't know. I feel like there are kind of scope, there is a lot of scope to grow. It's just kind of what else they could, as I mentioned earlier, make into something which is quantifiable and pointable, to coin a term on FPL. And I feel like there has to be a limit somewhere. There has to be a real line in the sand. Otherwise, you do end up kind of, I suppose, making it into a game which goes against the principle of being something that anybody anywhere could possibly play. And I think that probably wouldn't be what we want. I did want some extra level of complexity surrounding it. And I think we've kind of got it in a good way with DEFCONs. I mean, in the past, I previously, as I mentioned a couple pods ago, thought that bonus and using bonus system to reward more players could have been a way forward, but DEFCONs definitely does sort of remove the impetus on that, really. So end of the end, Nick, this year with the chips, I suppose you're kind of thinking of being fairly aggressive going forward as well, using that wild cards. When do you think you're going to use it? Given the fact you've bench boosted and free hit already, like, do you have any worries about being free chips down on a lot of people by game week 6, 7? I think you said you were looking at it.
Yeah, I haven't bench boosted yet, so I've still got that. I've only free hitted, but I'm thinking about bench boosting in 6 and then using the wild card in 7. So Game week 6 works really well for my team in general, just because everyone seems to have quite good fixtures. Liverpool have Palace, City have Burnley, Spurs have Wolves, for instance. Even United's got Brentford, and Chelsea have Brighton. So that's basically a quality team across the board that I can call upon. Forest of Sunderland as well. So if I bench boost then, and then in game week 7, I can then wildcard. And what I quite like about that is the fact that I just can then kill the bench, because I won't need to worry about that bench boost chip. It's been used, so I just have some rubbish on the bench and some devs and whatnot in case I need to call upon them. And then also in game week 7, there's just such a fixture shift for the likes of Arsenal. They've got a really good run of fixtures. So I will be targeting probably Gyökeres at that point, and whoever else is kind of in the zeitgeist. If perhaps something like Eze's kind of emerged as a key player for them, maybe he would come in or maybe even double defense with Gabriel and Calafiori or something. And then, yeah, a few other teams I think start to have some improved fixtures as well. City go on a really good run of fixtures, and probably at that point I will be shifting the template to Haaland from Salah. My only fear probably is just that game week 6, try and get through that without Haaland because they have Burnley, and hope that he doesn't punish too severely. But that is kind of my general plan. I think that wildcarding early last season really helped for me, so I do want to try and use it early. And I'm not too worried as well because we've got, as I said, we've got that AFCON week, which is just basically like another wild card to kind of change up your team if you need to, because you're just going to have loads of transfers to play with. And I've still got things like the triple captain as well. So I'm quite happy to kind of get these chips out the way early as possible. We've got another set coming, and try and boost my rank as early as possible as well.
Yeah, no, fair play. I feel like I want to use the bench boost to do exactly what you said, like kill the bench. But I didn't quite realise kind of the extent to it, just because I've got unlucky with you 50-50s, like Esteve versus Goodmanson, for example. I'd be a lot better off if I went with Goodmanson game week 1. Like, all these sort of little bits and pieces here and there, but you can't really legislate for your captain going off 30 minutes with a hammy. I just feel like I'm hoping I'm going to kind of see the season at the end. I'll be a bit of an amnesiac when it comes to the first sort of 5-6 weeks. Maybe game week 4 if I free hit in 4, which I'm going to do because it's active. And after that, I'm hoping it just kind of becomes like kind of game week 6, wild card, same as you. Past that, everything sort of, you start the season again, you see what everyone else is doing, but hopefully I can roll a little bit more then and kind of just take it from there. But yeah. No, I think it'll be really interesting how the season sort of ends as it goes. But yeah, no, very fun to have you back on the pod, Nick. Thanks for your time this evening. It's been great.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, thanks for having me back on. Appreciate it. It's always nice to come on every so often. I don't know when the next time will be. Maybe this time next year, we shall see. But yeah, really enjoyed being back on the pod. And apologies again if my sound has been poor. So yeah, just a reminder of who we are. We are Who Got the Assist. You can find us on Blue Sky, Who Got the Assist, or WGTA Nick. And on X as well, if you still use that, at WGTA_FPL or at WGTA_Nick. YouTube, it's just WGTA_FPL. And if you did enjoy the plots, please do one or all of the following. So just follow us on the socials, give us a 5-star rating on Spotify or iTunes, and a like and subscribe on YouTube if you're watching there. And all of these things just help get the pod out there, so it's truly appreciated. Tom obviously puts in like massive effort every single week, so yeah, obviously if you do like the pod, give us a 5-star, it'd be really appreciated. And yeah, thanks for having me back.
Thanks, Nick. No, great to have you on. And don't listen to Nick. I'm a weirdo. What the hell am I doing here? Recording FPL podcast week after week, but it is what it is. Thanks for listening and watching. We hope we assisted you with a bit of nostalgia. And those who've been with us for the last 9 years before we moved to videotape, and it was enjoyable. We'll be back on Tuesday the 9th with Sam once more. Enjoy the bake, and we'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
I earned my degree online at Arizona State University. I chose to get my degree at ASU because I knew that I'd get a quality education, they were recognized for excellence, and that I would be prepared for the workforce upon graduating. To be associated with ASU, both as a student and alum, it makes me extremely proud, and having experienced the program, I know now that I'm set up for success. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.
For RPA Honda Radio, spun to the Spirit of Honda, value, summer APR. It's a 25.5, ad ID, HKBR 5052001, stereo mix with 2 pop.
Summer's here, and it's time to bring the heat in a new Honda. Check out the Civic, Accord, or HR-V during the Honda Summer event. For a limited time, well-qualified buyers can get a 4.99